Hi everyone, my name is Rachel and welcome to this video. Over summer I was given some funding by the Institute for Advanced Teaching and Learning as part of the University of Warwick to do some research on the Sons of Africa, and this is my research project. Welcome. So yeah, this interdisciplinary approach to the Sons of Africa I hope is interesting. I hope you learned something about what I've been researching the past couple of months. We'll just get started. So, who were the Sons of Africa? The Sons of Africa were a group of men who signed a letter on the 15th of December 1787 to Granville Sharp, and in this letter they spoke about their anti-slavery and abolitionist politics.
Honourable and worthy Sir, give us leave to say that every virtuous man is a truly honourable man, and he that doth good hath the honour to himself, and many blessings are upon the head of the just, and their memory shall be blessed, and their works praise them in the gate. And we must say that we, who are a part or descendants of the much wronged people of Africa, are peculiarly and greatly indebted to you for the many good and friendly services that you have done towards us, and which are now even out of our power to enumerate. Nevertheless, we are truly sensible of your great kindness and humanity, and we cannot do otherwise but endeavour, with the utmost sincerity and thankfulness, to acknowledge our great obligations to you, and with the most feeling sense of our hearts, on all occasions to express and manifest our gratitude and love for your long, valuable, and indefatigable labours and benevolence towards using every means to rescue our suffering brethren in slavery. Your writings, sir, are not of trivial matters, but of great and essential things of moral and religious importance, worthy the regard of all men, and abound with many great and precious things of sacred writ, particularly respecting the laws of God and the duties of men. Therefore, we wish for ourselves and others that these valuable treatises may be collected and preserved for the benefit and good of all men, and for an enduring memorial of the great learning, piety, and vigilance of our good friend, the worthy author. And we wish that the laws of God and his ways of righteousness and truth, set forth and described therein, may be as a path for the virtuous and prudent to walk in, and as a clear shining light to the wise in all ages, and that these and other writings of that nature may be preserved and established as a monument or beacon to guide and to warn men, lest they should depart from the paths of justice and humanity, and that they may more and more become a means of curbing the vicious violators of God's holy law, and to restrain the avaricious invaders of the rights and liberties of men, while ever the human race inhabits this earth below. And ever, honourable and worthy Sir, may the blessing and peace of Almighty God be with you, and long preserve your valuable life, and make you abundantly useful in every good word and work. And when God's appointed time shall come, may your exit be blessed, and may you arise and forever shine in the glorious world above, when that sovereign voice, speaking with joy, as the sound of many waters, shall be heard, saying, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. It will then be the sweetest of all delights forever, and more melodious than all music. And such honour and felicity will the blessed God and Saviour of his people bestow upon all the saints and faithful servants who are redeemed from among men, and saved from sin, slavery, misery, pain, and death, and from the eternal dishonour and wrath impending upon the heads of all the wicked and rebellious. And now, Honourable Sir, with the greatest submission, we must beg you to accept this memorial of our thanks for your good and faithful services towards us, and for your humane commiseration of our brethren and countrymen unlawfully held in slavery. And we have hereunto to subscribe a few of our names as a mark of our gratitude and love. And we are, with the greatest esteem and veneration, honourable and worthy Sir, your most obliged and most devoted humble servants.
Signed by
Thomas Oxford, Joseph Almaze, George Robert Mandeville, John Adams, George Wallace, William Green, Bernard Elliot Griffiths, Thomas Cooper, Thomas Jones, John Christopher, ottobah, cugoano, olaudah, equiano, Jasper Goree or Brouwer Gigansmel, Joseph Sanders or Jan Elaine, George Williams or Kojo Amir.
Olaudah Equiano was born in 1745, Asaka, Ibo, in Benin, or modern-day Nigeria. Around the age of 11, him and his sister were kidnapped, and they were sold by local slave traders and were shipped across the Atlantic to Barbados, and then Virginia, which was a British colony at the time. In Virginia, he was sold to a Royal Navy officer, Lieutenant Michael Pascal, who renamed him Gustavus Vasa after the 16th century Swedish king. Equiano travelled the oceans with Pascal for 8 years, during which time he was baptized and learned how to read and write. Lieutenant Michael Pascal then sold Equiano to a ship captain in London, who took him to Montserrat, where he was sold to the prominent merchant Robert King. While working as a deckhand, valet and barber for King, Equiano earned money by trading on the side. In only 3 years, he made enough money to buy his own freedom. Equiano then spent much of the next 20 years travelling the world, including trips to Turkey and the Arctic, though he's considered to have settled in England around the 1770s. In 1789, he published his biography, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa, the African, which grew popular very quickly because of how pertinent it was to the abolitionist cause, and because it was one of the earliest books published by a black African writer who was also an ex-slave. The book has been described as a uniquely detailed account of an African's movement out of slavery, and the most important single literary contribution to the campaign for abolition. This following excerpt is from his interesting narrative detailing his initial thoughts regarding the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme.
On my return to London in August, I was very agreeably surprised to find that the benevolence of government had adopted the plan of some philanthropic individuals to send the Africans from hence to their native quarter, and that some vessels were then engaged to carry them to Sierra Leone, an act which redounded to the honour of all concerned in its promotion, and filled me with prayers and much rejoicing. There was then in the city a select committee of gentlemen for the black poor, to some of whom I had the honour of being known, and, as soon as they heard of my arrival, they sent for me to the committee. When I came there, they informed me of the intention of government, and as they seemed to think me qualified to superintend part of the undertaking, they asked me to go with the black poor to Africa. I pointed out to them many objections to my going, and particularly I expressed some difficulties on the account of the slave dealers, as I would certainly oppose their traffic in the human species by every means in my power. However, these objections were overruled by the gentlemen of the committee, who prevailed on me to go, and recommended me to the Honourable Commissioners of His Majesty's Navy as a proper person to act as commissary for government in the intended expedition, and they accordingly appointed me in November 1786 to that office, and gave me sufficient power to act for the government in the capacity of commissary, having received my warrant and the following order.
Olaudah soon became a spokesperson for black abolitionists both in the UK and in Britain's colonies. In Fryer's Staying Power, he talks about how Equiano was constantly consulted by Dolben and was received by both the Speaker of the House of Commons and the Prime Minister. According to him, there could have been no clearer indication that a wind of change was beginning to blow, thus showing the sheer extent of Equiano's campaigning and popularity, both complementing each other outside of the Sons of Africa. Also, Fryer writes how Equiano not only helped Hardy by passing on names and addresses of useful contacts, such as abolitionists in the provinces whom he had met on his speaking tours, but he also joined the London Corresponding Society. Olaudah Equiano was also in charge of the provision of supplies and stores for the resettlement plan to Sierra Leone, which I'll talk about later on. Olusoga notes how this was the highest ranking position to which a black Briton had ever been assigned by the British state. But as Olaudah learned more about the scheme, he protested against it, and he wrote to ottobah cugoano detailing the misuse of funds and mistreatment of the settlers. When Equiano's letter made its way to the press, there was a bitter dispute between him and Joseph Owen, who was in charge of the resettlement plan. He continued to vigorously protest against the transportation of black people to Sierra Leone because of how bad the conditions were. Olusoga writes how it was decided that Equiano was a disruptive influence who had poisoned the minds of the black poor, who had become, quote, troublesome and discontent as a result of his intrigues. He brought the Sierra Leone matter to the attention of the public, and for this he lost his job as commissary, was charged with incitement to unrest, and was put ashore at Plymouth, though later he was awarded £50 in compensation by the Admiralty. In 1792, Olaudah Equiano married an Englishwoman, Susanna Cullen, and they had 2 daughters. And 5 years later, on the 31st of March 1797, or sometime in early April as some sources suggest, he passed away. According to Staying Power, his friend Granville Sharp went to see him on his deathbed, and he had lost his voice and he could only whisper. 73 Riding House Street is where Olaudah Equiano lived post 1789. It was also where he published his seminal piece, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa, the African. Ottobah Cugoano, also known as John Stewart or Stewart, was born in 1757 as Kwabena Ottobah Cugoano. At age 13, he was captured in the Gold Coast, seized with a group of children, and transported from the Cape Coast to, and was consequently enslaved in, Grenada. He worked on a plantation until he was purchased in 1772, aged 15, by a British merchant named Alexander Campbell. Campbell took Kwabena to England, where he was subsequently given his freedom. Though different sources say different things, Gase's The Pan-African Movement says that he was brought up by Lord Hoth, who then took him to England to be his manservant, in which he learnt how to read and write. So I'm a bit unsure about that, but he got to London somehow. And on the 20th of August 1773, he was baptised at St James's Church, Piccadilly, as John Stewart, with the record stating, quote, a black aged 16 years. In 1784, he was employed as a servant by the artist Richard Cosway and his wife Maria. Schomburgh House in Pall Mall is where Cugoano lived and worked as a servant under his owners, Richard and Maria Cosway, between the years of 1784 and 1791. 12 Queen Street in Mayfair was where Cugoano moved to with Richard and Maria Cosway in 1791. Marika Sherwood writes, by 1786, Cugoano was clearly a well-known person in London's black community and in the anti-slavery circles. In that year, a man named Henry Deman was illegally kidnapped by his master in order to be shipped to the West Indies. Quote, black eyewitnesses rushed to tell Cugoano and William Green, another community leader. The 2 men rushed to Granville Sharp, who was an influential white abolitionist who set the legal bills in motion to have Henry freed. In 1787, he published his essay, Thoughts and Sentiments on the Evil and Wicked Traffic of Slavery and the Commerce of the Human Species. In this, he called for the complete abolition of slavery and the immediate emancipation of all slaves. It was sent to King George III, the Prince of Wales, and Edmund Burke, who was a leading Whig politician at the time, but to no avail as their stance had not changed. And it speculated a lot that Equiano either wrote the Thoughts and Sentiments or that he just helped Cugoano a lot with his piece of work, with the essay. I like to believe the latter is true. Nonetheless, this essay is deemed as a seminal piece of work, as Cugoano was the first black writer to write for the total abolition and emancipation of all slaves. Also in his essay, He declared that the slave had a moral right and a moral duty to resist, writing, "If any man should buy another man, and compel him to his service and slavery without any agreement of that man to serve him, the enslaver is a robber, and a defrauder of that man every day. Wherefore it is as much the duty of a man who is robbed in that manner to get out of the hands of his enslaver, as it is for any honest community of men to get out of the hands of rogues and villains." It was also really bold, which I liked. He wrote, "Every man in Great Britain was responsible in some degree for the slavery and oppression of Africans, quotes, unless he speedily riseth up with abhorrence of it in his own judgment, and to avert evil, declare himself against it. Men of eminence and power, nobles and senators, clergymen, and every man in office and authority, must incur a double load of guilt. Not only that burden of guilt in the oppression of the African strangers, but also in that of an impending danger and ruin to their own country." In 1791, only 4 years after the publication of his essay, he published a shorter version addressed to the Sons of Africa, and in this shortened version, he vocally unsupported Britain's efforts to establish a colony in Sierra Leone for London's poor blacks, and he proposed establishing a school for, quote, all his complexion who had not yet had the opportunity or could not afford to learn the laws of civilization and the Christian religion elsewhere. And not much is known about Cugoano post 1791, so it's unclear whether or not he created this school, and we don't know when he passed away. Less is known about George Robert Mandeville. We don't know when he was born, and we don't know when he passed away. We don't know where he was born. What we do know is that he appears in parish records, and it's clear that he married Anne Kirby on the 19th of January 1777 in St. Paul, Covent Garden. He had at least 3 kids, and it's speculated that he moved to Whitechapel, which was a poorer part of London at the time, because he was having a hard time financially, as records show that he needed to pawn his possessions. But despite his economic position and his low class, he probably didn't go to Sierra Leone, and it's probable that he had left service on marriage, which was a standard practice then, and would have been too busy running a business and raising a family to actively get involved in politics further than the Sons of Africa. Jasper Goree, or Brawa Gagansmel, was born in or around 1765. He appeared before the Middlesex Sessions in May of 1784, accused by Sarah Austin of assaulting her. He was given bail and the case went no further. He was apparently briefly imprisoned in Newgate for debt in 1789, and 10 years later he was buried in 1799, aged 34, in Westminster. And Goree, like Mandeville, also had money problems and was probably still in service when he died young, and we can speculate that he lived in or around Westminster. All that we know about Joseph Almaze is that he left service on marriage, which was a standard practice back then, as was the case with Jasper Goree and George Robert Mandeville. Like the others, we don't really see him outside of the letter that was signed by the Sons of Africa. We don't know where he lived, and we don't know when he died. Thomas Oxford gave evidence against a thief at the Old Bailey in 1792, and he was a parish constable in Westminster. There's no mention made of his colour, but at least one black man had previously served as a parish constable in London, so it's not impossible that this was one of the signatories. The Yorkshire stingo, located on the south side of Marylebone on Lytton Grove, was used by the Committee for the Relief of the Poor Black in 1786 for distributing alms. It can be speculated that the Sons of Africa visited here somewhat often to give community support, since they did a bit of campaigning for the migration of black people to the new and forming colony of Sierra Leone. The scheme to Sierra Leone was marketed by Henry Smeathman as an opportunity so advantageous that may perhaps never be offered to the black and poor population again, for they and their prosperity may enjoy perfect freedom there. He also spoke about how, quote, the settlers being under the protection of the British government will consequently enjoy both civil and religious liberty as in Great Britain. In this enjoyment, being settled in a country congenial to their constitutions and having the means by moderate labour of the most comfortable livelihood, the black poor would find a certain and secure retreat from their former sufferings of poverty, illness and racism. However, the scheme must not be romanticised. While it provided some sort of escapism for the displaced and free black population throughout the empire, it was spearheaded in London by the financial elite who they themselves were slave owners and slave traders. Obviously, the intention behind their financial and general investment in the black poor, often regarded as philanthropy, differed to that of the Sons of Africa, who cared more about the well-being of black people displaced throughout the empire. At one point, the Black Poor Committee, in charge of the resettlement scheme and providing security for the black poor, asked members of the public to stop giving charity to beggars, and the vagrancy laws were deployed to make their lives on the streets even more difficult, hence making Sierra Leone look even more attractive. Olaudah speaks about how Smeathman presented an almost entirely fictitious version of Sierra Leone to the committeemen in order to win them over. But had the middle and upper class white men actually done their research, they would have known that only a few years before, to another committee, Smeathman described Sierra Leone not as some earthly paradise, but as a death trap. If convicts were settled there, he told them, not 1 in 100 would be left alive in 6 months. The colony of Sierra Leone, which was marketed to the black poor population as a poverty relief scheme created by Henry Smeathman in order to show the pro-slavery campaigns that black people could be used, in that they could contribute to the formation, establishment and facilitation of a new colony. And the ulterior motives of the white elite became even more evident. For example, William Pitt the Younger, who was the Tory Prime Minister at the time, thought it was, quote, necessary that they, referring to black people, should be sent somewhere and no longer suffered to infest the streets of London. Following this and following the white elite showing their colours, the Sons of Africa, namely Equiano and Ottobah cugoano, openly criticised, left and lobbied against the scheme. Though there were other politically engaged black people who were in London. For example, in 1789, an unnamed, quote, African, not Gustavus Vassa, who discovered a much strong natural sense and spoke with wonderful facility, took part in a debate on the slave trade at Coachmakers' Hall in the city. And maybe this was a son of Africa, though maybe it wasn't. Peter Fryer, in Staying Power, notes how, in London at least, black servants were able to gather informally in small groups from time to time, no doubt to exchange information and discuss matters of common concern. These servants, given the gendered nature of domestic and reproductive labour, were likely to have been women, though, as Nasbau mentions, the black population of London during this time, so during the 1700s and the 1800s, was roughly 80% male and 20% female. And this is because the black page boy had become firmly established as an essential accessory among the richest and most fashionable, but also as a symbol of morally dubious extravagance and show. So families wanted black slaves, black male slaves, to show how rich they were. Therefore, indirectly related to the Sons of Africa is the forgotten and erased population of anti-slavery and anti-racist organising who were more likely than not poor and who may have been women. So it's probable that these women, who were often servants, contributed to abolitionist organising via hosting and providing resources when and where they could and using their networks and resources available to them. Chater, in the Untold Histories podcast, talks about how for roughly 3/4 of the black population in London during the late 1700s and early 1800s, the records show nothing about where they came from. but by looking at court records, between 150 and 300 black people are estimated to have been in London at one point or another during that time period, though little to nothing is known about how active they were and how involved they were, if they were, in the Sons of Africa in any capacity, or just in any organising, any anti-slavery organising in any capacity. For a second, let's pause and go back to the beginning where I introduced the Sons of Africa as an organising group. There's a debate regarding how much they operated as one. Catherine Chater notes in Sons of Africa how, although modern historians call this group of men freed slaves, freedom fighters, campaigners, and the like, there is no actual evidence that these men played any kind of role in the abolition movement, beyond signing 6 letters, 2 of them private communications, and 3 of them on the same day, in just 7 months, and another private note some 2 years before. And based on my individual mini biographies of all the signatories that I gave at the beginning of this video, the discrepancies in information are stark. For some, such as cugoano and equiano, more is known, whereas for others, such as Kojo Omer, Thomas Cooper, etc., much less, basically little to nothing, is known about them. Hence, we can assume that each signatory didn't further commit to the anti-slavery campaign in the same way. Perhaps they held meetings and even protests, but that information is just not available to us, or maybe I just haven't come across it in my research. Fryer notes how groups of white poor people in London marched or ran through Shoreditch, the City, Westminster and Southwark, captained by men like the journeyman Will Wright, William Pateman, and the coachmaster Thomas Tapling, gathering numbers as they went, swashing lamps, windows and accessible woodwork in the mansion house and the big townhouses of the nobility, in solidarity with the racialised black population, and also in support of the abolitionist cause. Perhaps some black folk attended these rallies, or maybe they were more concerned with survival as a black and probably a poor man in a white classist society. Maybe they went to Sierra Leone as part of the Sierra Leone resettlement scheme, and the records haven't picked that up. Maybe they went under a different name. Or maybe they remained in London and attended fashionable routes or clubs and supped, drank and entertained themselves with dancing and music consisting of violins, French horns and other instruments at a public house in Fleet Street till 4 in the morning, whereby Fryer notes how no whites were allowed to be present, for all the performers were black. As Chater says, discovering more about most of the signatories to these letters has been virtually impossible, as their names are common and no further details like occupations are given. So really, the possibilities are endless, and they could be hiding in the resources that we do have, we just don't know. And on that, navigating the archives that pertain to 18th and 19th century London is particularly difficult. The Untold Histories podcast highlights how people weren't really mentioned as black, and when the word black began to be used as a racial classification in the archives as time went on, a large proportion of Indian people were included in that. So political blackness really did start to form, and that political blackness has skewed a lot of the research and a lot of the resources that we have available. So I hope you learned something, I hope you enjoyed. I think the Sons of Africa were particularly difficult to research because they signed letters, and I think that, as telling as that is of like organising, it's not the be all and end all, and as I've said many times and I'll continue to say, maybe the archives haven't picked up the work that they did because the work that they did wasn't respectable, and the work that they did wasn't mainstream, and it wasn't palatable to the white masses, and perhaps that's why they didn't garner as much attention as Equiano and Cugoano. But I do think that their presence, and not only their presence but their organising, their activism, their signing letters is very telling, and I think it's quite, and I say this a lot when it comes to like history in general, I think it's quite affirming to know that there were people who existed hundreds of years before I did who are campaigning and who are demanding the same things as me. As sad as it is that is the case, because why are we still, why are we still campaigning for this? Why has there not been change? I think it's also hopeful to know that like we're part of a wider legacy, we're part of a wider historical legacy. Ways to organise and ways to campaign change over time. So what works for the Sons of Africa may not work for us, and what works for us may not work for people who like come 200 years after us, 200, 300 years after us, if we are still in the same position as black and racialized people, which is quite a depressing thought. So yeah, that's everything for my research project. Again, thank you to IATL for funding this project. I really enjoyed researching. This research project was really giving Hot Scholar Summer, Hot Scholar September, you know, like I was really in my hot girl bag. I hope you learned something that you didn't know about, because even me, like the Sons of Africa, I knew about olaudah, equiano, I learned about him in year 9. I knew about ottobah, like cugoano, but I didn't know about the Sons of Africa. I wonder if there was a Daughters of Africa. Saying that, buy the book. Thank you all for watching. If you've made it this far, I don't even know how long this video is, it might be really long. So yeah, thank you, and maybe I'll see you next summer for another research project if I get funding. LSE, hi, thank you very much. That's everything. I'm gonna stop talking, so bye.